The internet is cracked, the show that asks the question, can we coexist with our creation?
Hello, I'm Seth Camillo.
And I am Caroline Risberg, and we are The Internet is Cracked by Addicts for Addicts.
And today we are very, very lucky to have Daniel Schiff with us. Dr. Daniel S. Schiff of Purdue University is a scholar who studies the ethical and social impacts of artificial intelligence. Today, we'll talk with him about how AI and robotics are reshaping society and what it means for all of us. Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure to be here, Seth and Caroline.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And I'm actually going to jump in the first question. And whose values should guide the design of AI? Basically, what I try to say, who is God here?
It's a great starting question, and it's one of the tough ones. This is a perennial debate in philosophy about what are the right applied values at the lowest, most kind of fine-grained level. What are the right value frameworks? Are these value frameworks commensurate? We have these traditional questions about power and do elites and experts get to say, or the general public. I think we know some things that are wrong here that we don't want to do. So we can see values or manifestations of values that are bad, or a lack of values. So we don't see transparency, we don't see responsiveness, we don't see human well-being protected. But broadly, I guess I would say that I think this is a collective effort. So I do think the experts and the technocrats have a role, and I don't think that's just computer scientists. Broadly discussed in the discourse and the literature. Social scientists, ethicists, lawyers, historians, sociologists, designers, members of the public, vulnerable groups, impacted groups. So if I'm making an AI use case in social work, I want to talk to the social workers, I want to talk to the supervisors, I want to talk to the clients. If I'm making an AI tool in education, I want to talk to the teachers and the parents and the administrators and the designers and the textbook companies. So that still doesn't solve the problem, because how do you gather these voices? How much information do people need? How do you aggregate their preferences? But kind of a broad collective grappling to figure out the right principles and values behind these systems.
Yep.
Currently, who do you think is benefiting the most from this new amazing technology that we're experiencing, AI and robotics combined?
I have to say the venture capital class seems to be benefiting the most initially. There are big companies, there are startups, some will succeed, some will fail, but we're seeing multi-billion dollar, $100 billion, leading into trillion-dollar valuations for companies. So a lot of people are making fortunes off of this. This is propping up parts of the stock market, so some other people are benefiting more broadly. But in terms of a lot of the valuable use cases that we're sort of hoping to see from AI and robotics in healthcare, in the environment, in agriculture, some of these are in play. Some of these are making positive impacts or are promising. We have things like AlphaFold. We have things like open evidence in healthcare that's providing good information to medical professionals. But a lot of this is not well realized, or I think is even counterproductive. So in the educational space, where I think all of us work to some degree, I think there's some backfiring of these tools where in some ways it's hurting more than it's helping.
Is AI going to turn into a surveillance tool no matter what we do?
I'm tempted to say yes. So there's a mantra in the field of science and technology studies. We say, look, the way technology develops is not deterministic. We think it always advances and it's linear and it's just going to follow market forces, but really we have agency. Things that seem obvious now only look so in retrospect. We actually have decision points along the way where we can change the direction. And that's supposed to be an important insight from a lot of scholarship, that we can change the direction of things. At the same time, just intuitively, and I don't know how you all feel, but I find it hard to imagine that there are not people who will use it for these purposes.
Right.
We have a legacy of doing this with datafication and cookies and authoritarian governments and for security purposes, legitimate or illegitimate. So there's just a lot of institutional momentum and incentive to do this. So that would be a lot to overcome. That would be a really deep social and structural change to say, hey, let's stop inappropriately monitoring, civilians or dissidents or,
Right.
possible consumers.
Can I ask you kind of what your personal view is? I mean, I struggle with this. I think Caroline, hey, this is what our show is about, basically. But what do you feel? Is this, we go back and forth. Is this a good invention or a
Mm,
bad invention? Have we opened Pandora's box, basically?
mm,
It's a good framing. It's probably the framing I would have put back at you if you hadn't had phrased it that way. Um, so this is a pretty common thing to have to think through in I guess my field and in y'all's field is this stuff good? Is it bad? As an educator, as an academic, I try to be as I don't want to say strictly balanced, but sort of thoughtful and moderate. So there can be really great things that happen. Technology has done really great things. We've grown up in a time where we've seen amazing accomplishments in reducing poverty and improving literacy. And then we see all this bad stuff happening and things that really don't have to happen. And we could or seem like we should be able to avoid them. So we have this sort of background setting and we can sort of be cognizant of both sides. Um, so given the sort of the pros and cons here and can we innovate responsibly, I think there's a little bit of an asymmetry or maybe a major asymmetry. We have now hundreds of billions of dollars going into AI, and perhaps you're thinking, these days about generative AI and large language models and things like that.
mhm.
And we have a tiny percentage of that going into, ethics or safety. So we're going to spend much more money on automating, workers out of their jobs or just
Right.
automating things, whether or not they help workers, then, hey, let's spend $100 billion to make workers happier and have more well-being. So I think there's this big asymmetry. And because of that, while I love the innovation, I love the positive potential, I spend more time focusing on the risks and thinking about can we shape this in positive directions. So I think that the result is that I stay more worried about this. I do think OpenAI opened a Pandora's box. They put out a manifesto sometime in the first, I think, 6 months saying, hey, one of the things that we're going to do with this release is sort of shock the world into reacting. And the world's going to have
Yeah.
to, they're going to have to, how do we govern this? And they're going to have to figure this out. And we've sort of raised, okay, that's cute. And it will become true in some senses. But I struggle to think that this was justified, even looking at the impacts in the educational system.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I, I'm just thinking how, how those, for example, OpenAI or whatever, who make all those systems. I mean, how can they be accountable when the system, some of them actually have caused harm, you know?
Yeah, you have this. I mean, you have the traditional kind of Silicon Valley tech bro, move fast, break things culture, and we've collectively complained in the discourse for a decade or two now about
Right.
ways this backfired. And look, we need to regulate social media in different ways. Look at harms that have emerged, notwithstanding positive things. There's some awareness that we don't want to repeat this with AI. We don't want to repeat the mistakes of social media. And yet, when push has come to shove, the economic incentives and the seeming geopolitical incentives, we pushed incredibly aggressively on adoption. So it's really fascinating the way that the sort of the marketing of these tools plays out, and all the companies have to adopt AI systems and
Mhm.
sell the tool, whether or not the tool is what your hospital or your office actually needs to make its work better. So it plays out in really interesting ways. But to your point, Caroline, we don't have great systems for accountability here. We have, we have
Mhm.
laws, we have, and the EU sort of tinkered with an AI liability directive and a product liability directive. And so there are legal regimes, not my expertise area, but there are ways to hold companies accountable, and there are lawsuits on, the youth who committed suicide or on
Right.
taking advantage of people's intellectual property without consent, other things like that. But uh, broadly, a lot of the liability frameworks, certainly in the US, you have to show specific harms, you have to be the person injured.
Is the many hands effect in place here that so many, like with the credit default swaps, there's so many people involved that nobody is held accountable at the end of the day?
This
Good
is
question.
the many hands problem is a classic concern in engineering and multi-actor settings, and it has some really interesting manifestations in AI, where we have, not just a developer and then the hospital who procures it and the doctor who uses it and the patient who doesn't listen to the instructions or whatever. We have these frontier AI model developers who sell tools to some other company that's customizing it, and they're fighting about who's going to share which information and who's accountable for harms. And this is not well regulated. So there's been attention to these supply chain problems that make the many hands problem difficult. I will say that I heard from a philosopher colleague recently an argument that I thought was interesting. Here's what you all think. Um, that it doesn't really matter from a legal regime perspective who is held accountable as long
Mm,
as someone is held accountable.
mm,
Because the insurance schema, for instance, will cover that. I'll say, okay, well, the doctors are responsible. That needs to be in their training. It needs to be in their preparation. That means we need to give them the right information and the right safeguards and reporting mechanisms. Oh no, the doctors aren't responsible. It's the healthcare system that's responsible for technology procurement. Then they're the ones who would get sued and have, malpractice insurance or whatnot. So that's, I think, an interesting lens that, yes, there's a many hands problem, but it's not an unsolvable problem. We can take action on it.
mm.
Maybe legally, it's more feasible to solve than it is from sort of a pure abstract ethical sense.
So you feel some positive belief that we can regulate this?
I would say yes, Seth. I do have some positive belief, and there's some reasons for that. So one is the AI ethics discourse, and this starts in popular imagination in the mid late 2010s with a lot of like technical fairness and safety and transparency. It goes back earlier. I started working in this in the late 2000s. AI ethics is now a major part of AI discourse and broader discourse. My students know about it, a lot of members of the public. All of the
Mhm.
national AI policy strategies have chapters in AI ethics. This is more than any technology historically in terms of its coverage and sophistication. Doesn't mean we've solved it, but there's a lot of work. There's a lot of work on governance and safety frameworks and benchmarking and people pushing for auditing and certification. All of these things can go poorly. They can all be captured. There are efforts to capture and water them down. So it's an ongoing fight. But we do see frameworks being used. We do see hundreds of standards that have been built, actually. We see, in the US, dozens of states that have put bans on deep fakes for child
Mm,
sexual abuse material or non-consensual intimate imagery or political deep fakes. So there are things we can do and that we are doing. Now, are we doing them at the right scale such that they're effective enough? You know, Probably the European Union is doing a better job than the US at thinking about this holistically, but it's not a totally, undefeatable challenge, I would say.
mm. Good. I actually want to ask you because I don't know, and I want you to explain what it is. What is IEEE 7010?
Yeah, yeah. So IEEE is the largest technical professional association. Computer scientists, electrical engineers. I want to say they have 400,000 members. Please, look that up. Large international association that produces many papers and conferences and series and reports. And they also have a standards body. They have a standards
Mhm.
association, standards development organization. So most people will know IEEE for making Wi-Fi standards, but they make a lot of other standards. In the mid 2010s, IEEE launched the Global Initiative for the Ethics of Autonomous and Intelligent Systems, sort of the Ethics of AI working group, and started working on 13 or 15 international industry standards. So all about AI ethics. So there's a bias standard, there's a privacy standard, there's a children's data standard, I believe. And 7010 was a standard looking at the impacts of AI on human well-being.
Okay.
And it's a
Yeah.
very, broad notion: environmental harms, health harms, psychological well-being, community, culture, all these kinds of things. So I was secretary of the standard. It was published in 2020, so it's the first AI ethics standard to be published
Mm.
anywhere. And there
Wow.
were a few cool things here. So one is there's a focus on the whole AI life cycle. So
Did you say
design and
AI life cycle? Did you say that?
AI life cycle.
That's interesting. Okay.
So it's become I think a standard accepted practice that we don't just want to look at what an AI model spits out and say we're just going to test that and we're good. It's not biased, we're done. No, no, no. What we need to do is, how is it designed? What data did we use? What was our logic? How is it trained? How is it validated? What happens when you put it into the real world? What are the long-term harms? So there's a whole life cycle, like
Mm.
an environmental or product life cycle. So we said we've got to look at the whole AI life cycle. We said you have to engage with stakeholders, as we talked about a little bit before.
Mhm.
Look at your directly impacted, students using ChatGPT, but also indirect. Look at the teachers, look at the parents, look at the teachers' unions. Talk to these people, measure impacts in the real world, and look at human well-being in this very broad sense,
So you
not
played a big
just
you played a big part in this, putting this together?
yeah, yes, I was secretary, so I was on, the leadership and, drafted a bunch of the content. And we had
Wow.
lots of kind of follow-up projects and
That's
wrote a
awesome.
paper about it. And
Wow, very cool.
It's very cool.
Yeah, that's very cool.
I mean, I more and more we're doing this show and understand more and more. It's how important it is. Like when you said the life cycle, like what I think it's awesome what you're doing.
So the thing is that you're saying there's 400,000 members. Yes, I know we gotta check the we'll check up on that. Maybe it's 420, maybe it's 380. But what's interesting is it's a pressure point. It seems to me that there are so few pressure points to push back against OpenAI,
Yeah.
Anthropic, and all these, and this sounds like an actual, they have power basically that might be useful to push back. Is that something you, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is that something that you might agree with?
this is a really interesting sentiment because, we think about the different actors in this space. Right? We have the big tech companies and small ones. We have industry associations that are kind of lobbyists for different companies in different sectors. We have the NGOs, right? The civil society groups, the advocacy groups. We have academics, the general public. And yeah, we have these professional associations, things like standards bodies or other types of professional groups, collections of doctors, collections of police officers. They can exert influence, in their spheres. They can lobby and advocate and donate. They can set their own professional norms. It becomes, interesting and messy in practice, sort of how they exert power and how they think about their role. So are they willing to go forward and put a comment in at a regulation, or do they actually donate money, or are they just sort of building soft norms? So somebody at the IEEE, or more than one person, the leader of the initiative was John C. Havens, cared about well-being and said, let's do a bunch of stuff, and worked really hard. And a few of us cared about sustainability. So we built environmental sustainability into our thinking. That was early in the AI space. So I think this stuff can make an impact. I think some of our ideas spilled into other major AI regulations, for instance. But I often see this as, uh, in some ways, a battle of discourse and ideas. So whether IEEE is going to, all the members go on strike, or we all sign a code of ethics. They do have a code of ethics.
Mhm.
We teach classes. Is that going to sort of move the needle through education and professional norms, or is it, hey, some of the leadership here or some of the members in the society on social implications of technology, IEEE, SSIT, we care about this stuff. We're going to do conferences. We're going to write papers. We're going to build communities. IEEE
Mhm.
has built an AI ethics certification program. So there's a lot of ways they can exert sort of influence and use their discourse, but lots of sort of complicated intergroup dynamics.
And you use the
Mhm.
word complicated, and my emotions are complicated because this is fairy dust, this stuff, and it is, I find myself on almost like a football team that I love and I hate with AI. I'm like, "Oh, no, 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 let them use the libraries of the world's knowledge for free," because I'm really liking what I'm getting out of this, on my cell phone when I look up, some medical information. And on the other hand, I'm like, this is completely unethical from top to bottom. And so, how can a person deal with this sort of conflict?
This is a great
Mm,
question. I have to think out loud with you here because I'm grappling with this. But I will say a version of what you're saying is called the trust paradox. So we've done some research, other folks have. We were looking at the public using generative AI to reach out to their political representatives. Right? I'm in the political science department. So, well, people use ChatGPT to rate their politicians, and that'll increase access and sort of decrease inequity. And some of the stuff we were kind of worried about and found to some degree is even when people think it's bad, so they think maybe politicians are going to think everything is spam and I'm not going to trust it anymore. And this is just junk email that I'm getting. I still think it's cool and I still want to do it. I think the same thing we saw, social media era and with our data policies. This stuff is
Um,
sketchy and I don't want to use it, but wow, Google search is so useful, Amazon's so useful. So
right.
this is the paradox, and I experienced this too. I'm inclined to say that there are some things that we can exert our agency over to make some meaningful changes. So you can say, for instance, I think company X is more ethical than company Y. I'm just not going to use company X's products. I think they're taking things more seriously. They're respecting privacy better. They're donating to important research or helping the environment more. So we can do some of those things. There are people who are strong AI resistors who, in my setting in education, I'm not going to use it in my classroom. I'm not going to let my students use it. There are people who can go to that, and there's a little more debate about how tenable that is, over the long term. Um, and then there's stuff that seems very hard to escape. So what is it like to not have your data out there and have your data be misused? And how much work would you have to do to get all your data taken down from the brokers and all of your minerals and supply chain? All this stuff is
Right.
entangled in unethical, global systems. Maybe some of this stuff we're aware of, we are active for politically. We vote about it, we express it in our workplaces, to our families, to our colleagues, without divesting from the system entirely. So for me, at least, I'm probably doing some choices and then trying to act with respect to the system in ways that I think will push things in better directions. But there's still a big paradox and still a lot of hypocrisy on my end.
It's hard to if you stay away, from it.
it is a lot like social media in that everybody hates it and everybody uses it. Like there's been so many times on social media I've said I'm not going to use this, and of course there's benefit to it. I mean, as much as people say, "Oh, it's just a horrible place," well, I do know when somebody's had a baby, and I do know when somebody's dad has died. There is value to that, and nobody can make the argument that there isn't value to that. And that sort of brings a larger question to, do you think we can have a global is this gonna be how the EU is sort of setting the tone now? Do you think we're gonna get global laws, or is this gonna be piecemeal, region by region? And then even if it is piecemeal, is it going to then affect the companies if they wanna do business in Spain? Is it going to change how we experience the product in America?
Yeah, so these are important questions about
Mm,
harmonization and centralization or decentralization. Can we achieve global governance, or do we want sort of local customization? I have a book chapter I wrote recently talking about different kind of possible futures. Does AI governance go more the way of in the environmental regulation regime? We have targets, so we don't really meet them, and there's not much enforcement. But some people are trying in some places. Does it go the way of aviation, where there are kind of commensurate standards and some global standards at enforcement? Does it
mhm.
go
That's
the
so
way?
interesting. That's a really
Yeah.
that is interesting that industry that you just brought up does have global standards. That's very interesting. Yeah.
And they have local customization to sort of make it, interoperable. So they're different, or organic food, or fair trade. So there are models. I think in my speculation, I'm guessing this goes more the way of the environmental regime. So there's a bunch of organizations and binational and multinational groups and bodies and conferences and standards bodies that meet up and try to share ideas and harmonize a little bit. Is the United Nations going to pass a big global law? Probably not. The United Nations is, struggling to even get restrictions on lethal autonomous weapons. Some of the
Yeah.
most important signatories don't want to, or won't do that. There are not many actors that can do much more effectively than, say, the European Union can. So I see loose coordination. I see some harmonization. Um, there might be new bodies that are built, and depending on what happens with AI, and if we get big incidents, yeah, maybe we do end up with some kind of monitoring regime or some kind of body that sets some thresholds or things like that. But right now, I'm seeing mostly national level
And,
regulation.
and and people
Mm.
don't realize, like what you just said about autonomous. I mean, they're jamming the drones, right? And now people are developing. So if you're at war and your drone gets jammed, then it will switch in. I've just read there's drones that will switch into autonomous mode and make a decision on what they're going to blow up on their own using artificial intelligence. So I mean, this is real and happening now in a very dangerous way. And I think people sitting at home with ChatGPT
Mm.
asking, you know, questions about like, Billy Bob Thornton's rise to fame don't really ingest, you know what I mean?
It's interesting how people have been observing this issue emerging for decades. I don't know, lethal robotics, and we build these things like what we're building them to help people with disabilities. We're building, robot dogs for emergency rescue. It's like, and we'll militarize it also. So we see this trend happening, and we don't seem to be able to restrain ourselves too effectively. The pressure is too great.
Mm.
It's concerning, yeah. That there is a lot of work done by the U.S. military agencies actually to build responsible AI ethics codes and frameworks and repositories, and some of this has paused recently, but there's a lot of work done. They have good doctrines on a lot of this, and there's work on what does meaningful human control require? What do I need to do if I'm using a drone? When do I hand it off or not? But
Mhm.
these things still tend to get a little bit away from us. I agree. When there's this incentive to, yeah, let's make this fully autonomous. Let's let this be an option. Let's rush things and not have our cybersecurity in place. And this is one of the areas where the public and experts will be, you know, quite concerned, with AI use here.
And
Mhm.
our show is, question the fundamental question we're asking is, can we coexist with our creation? And to me, if you're using autonomous, if if machines are making autonomous decisions about who to kill, is it still war? You know, is it war? Because it always was a human being making the decision that I am going to kill this other human being. When that goes away, where does our philosophical beliefs in life go?
I think there are even more chaotic ways that these, our creations are affecting our humanity. So we can certainly see. I mean, there are high profile cases, malevolent machines or autonomous weapons gone awry, but also how we think, what information we consume, our identity, who we associate with. Now we're seeing in the educational space how people learn, what they think represents arguments or ideas or positions. Um, uh, uh, it's affecting our associations, our socialization, our relationships. We have large portions of youth and adults, I'm sure, who are using companion chatbots. So it's really changing our identity in personal life and work life. And so, not only how do we coexist with our creations, but sort of who are we after this point at which we have made these
Yeah.
creations? They're entangled. Yes. So I think in y'all's work in your podcast, you focused a lot on the internet and social media as sort of precursors of these ideas. I'm curious how you see AI entering into this conversation. Is it the same patterns? Is it different patterns? How do you?
No, for me, I feel like well, more and more we're doing this, I'm learning more what it is. But I have to say I'm kind of I think I'm sort of be really scared of the policy and who is actually deciding about the who's actually building the AI, because I very hard to see how this whole system can benefit everyone and globally. Uh, I don't know, and it's just a few companies that are actually making the AI, and really hard like Seth and I, we have talked about this. If I were, let's say I'm building AI, who says that I am the right one? Like my beliefs and what I'm doing and that I am correct. And the same, like, because, anything from a religion to, all the things that comes into it, we can't just be one system. And we're so complicated as people with all our beliefs and look at the world, how most wars in the world have been about religion just because we can't agree on each other just for something that should actually be very simple, just be good people. But I think the human we are, so I'm a little bit worried about AI in the big picture more than ChatGPT.
Two things to make me think about. One is just take the release of ChatGPT, right? That's the modern moment. This feels like something that should have been a collective decision, given the scale of the implications, and it was not a collective decision. Like, it was a small number of people.
Right.
And I would say that to me, the internet was the invention of TNT, conventional weapons, and AI is nuclear weapons. It's a whole
Mm,
different ball of wax, and to me, its power is infinite, and I feel like it it consumes the internet even to give itself more power, obviously. And so, is it can you even separate AI from the internet at all?
right.
Since I feel like it's basically consumed it, and now it's using it for its own use, for its own, profitability, and I feel like it's unstoppable at this point.
Yeah,
And you're
me too.
watching things like social media platforms getting taken over by bots more than ever before, and bots
Yeah.
responding to bots, and people don't know which images are real and fake. So it is really changing kind of internet design and culture. Search engine optimization, the viability of NGOs or local news sites that aren't getting ad clicks in the same way. You know,
Yeah,
you know,
it's terrifying. I saw it the other day talk about deep fake. I call it deep fake. I saw like two. It was a video made of AI, and it was a man falling in the water. He was fishing and falling in the water, and the big question was: is this AI or is this a real guy? It looked so real. Everything looked so incredibly real, and but it was AI. Things like that scares me. I'm also going to say, like, who do you know who to trust? Like when I'm turning on, let's say social media or whatever, I don't know. I don't know. Is that actually the person saying that? Or because it looks so real. I mean, you can really messing with people's head.
and you have, not just that direct a deception. So we've
Right.
seen large fraud cases, faking being, C-suite members of companies defraud people, faking being politicians, all sorts of kind of, sexual crimes that are happening and
Mm,
extortion. But these sort of second order effects where I don't know what to trust. I don't know if I trust news sources. I don't know if I want to engage with people. What if I'm having all these fake conversations? How do I know if I'm having real relationships with people? So it does have these, spillover effects. And this is where maybe to one of your earlier questions that like these technologies can do really cool things. Maybe we can make more and better entertainment and better video
mm,
games, and we can make the lives of hardworking, movie developers easier, so they're not working crazy hours or whatever it is. But that's, often we're just finding every angle, and that doesn't mean that we're rolling out these tools safely. So the deep fake fight is quite intense.
And it is
yeah.
also wondrous. For instance, a family member of mine is ill at the moment, and I just spoke into ChatGPT for 5 or 10 minutes describing all the circumstances that led us to this point in the hospital. And I said, make it a 10-point, bullet pointed, 2-sentence each, something that the doctor could read. And the doctor was absolutely amazed and was like, this is so great that I have never seen anything like this. This puts everything, usually it would take so much time to sift through all this information, get things correctly in line, and it did something wonderful. It was helpful. It
Yeah.
was really helpful. But not deep fakes are so prevalent that they're even, Taylor Swift and they're even ranking who is defrauding the most people. It's who's the girl? She did the jeans ad that everybody was yeah,
Sweeney
Sweetie.
something.
Yeah, Sweeney and
Yeah.
Taylor Swift are the most used to defraud people out of their money. Now, I don't know who believes that Taylor Swift is contacting them, but they are making videos and audio recordings and and written stuff that is evidently, working.
So a Brad Pitt scam, I think. So Brad Pitt in the hospital extorted a bunch of
Yeah.
money
Oh,
from a woman. Yeah,
Yeah.
crypto scams, pretending to be politicians, all that. I think this gets us back to this is why in my work, my center, we focus on quote unquote responsible innovation. Because
Yeah.
we're all living in this paradox, right? We see all the cool stuff. I'm using these tools all the time, and I'm second guessing if I should be using these tools or what I should use them for.
Right.
And then we're seeing all this messy stuff happen, and it should be avoidable, but it feels unavoidable. So the question is, can we sort of differentially develop the good things and mitigate the bad things? So it's worth doing. I think it's a hard long-term battle. I do feel like in the last couple of years, the pace of the innovation side has shot ahead, and
Hmm.
we've fallen behind managing some of these other serious social consequences.
That's really interesting that you said that, because that was a question we had written down for you. Are we being is technology outpacing regulation?
I think that's right. Yeah, you take a couple of our case studies. We roll it out in classrooms. Could it do amazing things and differentiate and make lessons better and make everyone's jobs better and more creative? Sure. Or is 80% of the use case cheating and damaging our own learning and undermining our growth and citizenship and future workforce viability? So it's that stuff that's happening. The easiest stuff is happening first. And I think we see the same thing with deepfakes. Could we make all sorts of amazing creative content and empower artists, or are we going to make tons and tons of non-consensual imagery and scam and frauds? And I'm just not happy with the balance of these things.
No.
So our regulation is behind, and I want to get a bit broader than regulation. Our whole social infrastructure, our social contract is behind.
Mm.
What does it
Mm.
take again for a teacher, just because we've all been through these systems, to do this well? I've got to test the tools. They're changing over time. What does this mean for my lessons and for assessment? And what skills do students even need? I need to iterate over and talk to colleagues and think about the future of my discipline. It takes years and years of hard work and trialing and evaluation and research to figure out. But we haven't had that time. We just launched it into classrooms in
Yeah.
6 months or a year. And I think it's the same thing with social media platforms and deep fakes and replacing creative work, writing or art or whatever it is.
Yeah.
AI generated music. Have we had enough time to think about this and build the layers of systems and social order to make us happy with how this is rolling out? And it's unfortunate that we have to do this reactively.
It's so quick. There are things I see on social media, I send them to Caroline, that I think are so cool and so beautiful and so interesting. And yes, they are built by AI, but is there some collaborative effort between AI and humanity? The chisel, without the chisel, you can't work with stone, but you don't, it's the man hammering the chisel that gets, or the woman who gets credit for the sculpture. So there is some of that I wonder, like, is there such a thing as AI art? Is that something that could be considered art, you know?
another really interesting space, and there are now competitions and people winning prizes, and you can the average person, you can say, oh, I love this AI art and I can't tell. So this happening in music where AI artists
Yeah.
climbing the charts in some places. So there can be cool stuff. There are multimedia artists who do this. But then at the same time, I think you make a really good point about the craft. So an example, one of my undergrads I was teaching last fall, I think, we had some exercises and in-class debates, and she, for one of her speeches, she went and she brought, I guess she did some pottery, and I don't think she'll be offended. I think she said, I'm not very great at this. I'm not an expert, but not perfectly shaped or colored. And now here's the AI image, and this was made in 1 second. I like my art
Mm.
better. And
I
this
remember
gets to a
Yeah.
sort of point that I think is worth making, which is, yeah, you can write your paper faster, you can write your novel faster, you can pop out 1,000 songs and all this stuff. But this doesn't have to be why you do things or how you do things. You can work 100 hours on a painting. That's worse than the AI painting, in that case.
Mm.
So we don't have to build our lives around the values of speed and efficiency and optimization. We can enjoy doing music for the sake of doing music, even if it's slower.
I love that. I love that. And I think that's actually a very, very good point. Very, very good, at least for me. Because as you were saying, her pottery, I would probably also love it much more because because it wasn't perfect. Perfect is not the best. And what is perfect? That it almost to me they're becoming unperfect because it's like I like if I see an artist or the whatever that it's maybe something that's a little bit off or not off, but I am, and I think that's very important. It's we should not go after the speed. And unfortunately, I think that's where we are now. Everything has to be faster. It has to be better. You're throwing stuff in ChatGPT, write my essay. Okay, ChatGPT, write my essay, but did I really write it? Did I really understand what it was all doing? I think we need to start asking ourselves those questions, like what am I doing?
those are such
You
great,
know?
both of what you said is so great. And I make music, and I am not the greatest musician, but when I listen to it, I love even the imperfections because I hear me trying to do it in a certain way and achieving it sometimes, not achieving it. And I sort of relive the experience of making the music. And yeah, when you just put a prompt in, that's gone. It's something else.
You have memories and maybe a music teacher or a bandmates or I don't know, a first dance or something. You're putting care into it. You're putting heart into it. There's a story. Caroline, I don't know if you're an artist as well or just an art lover, but yeah, I think that's right. Efficiency is one value. Efficiency is a
Yeah.
value that's built into AI systems. They are optimization engines. They optimize a loss function. Um,
Mhm.
that isn't the only value that matters. And even when
No.
I'm talking to students, even from an economic perspective, I'm worried about the economy, I'm worried about cost of living, I'm worried about jobs. The grades don't matter that much, I just need to get it done. You're shortchanging your own ability to survive in the marketplace.
Yeah.
Um, if all you can do is, produce something that is produced by an AI prompt, you have no value add or the AI system. You're automating yourself out of a job. So there's
Oh,
so many reasons, whether you're just being purely instrumental and following sort of our cultural ethos of productivity and survival and competition, or whether you're taking on other values, which we should, of our art and our agency and our creativity and our meaning and things like that.
yeah.
And it may be
Yeah.
a case of is what is better, maybe just what is different, but this is the internet is crack, and I feel like there's a dark night coming, over the, horizon, So I don't know if you've heard about this band. They're not really a band, they're an AI creation, but they've gotten millions and millions of streams on Spotify and Apple Music. They're called the Velvet Sundown, and despite what I wanted, I couldn't help but be moved by their music. It's actually really good. I don't know if you can call it music since it's not created by a human, but whatever it is, it works.
So if we extend the metaphor, so the internet is crack, internet is TNT, and AI is fission bombs. Is AI meth? Like, what is AI in this world?
I think AI is crack meets meth meets everything. I think it is.
Yeah.
I
Just the
think
whole cocktail.
it is basically you're giving a huge chunk of your brain away and putting AI in there and replacing it. That's what I feel.
Yeah.
And I'm guilty of it as even though I'm making the show, even though Caroline and I are doing this, we both, you know,
Feel
partic
guilty to it too. I'm not gonna sit and say I don't use ChatGPT or AI or different things because we do. I mean, every day on our phones, it's AI. You know, it knows where I'm going and everything. You know, like I feel like I'm tracked, and it freaks me out a little bit too. They just did an upgrade on my phone, and then they start coming those questions. Do you allow this and this to know everywhere you've been going and all time forever or something like that? I'm like, what's that mean? Like after doing this show, I start to be really, really careful what I'm actually allowing my devices to do or not do. I'm not just allowing, well,
Yeah.
sometimes I do,
You're exerting some
but
agency. We have my wife and I have a 6-month-old, and we're not putting him
uh
all over social media. Yeah, we've learned some lessons about this stuff.
yeah,
how long until you allow your by the way, congratulations.
yes.
And but how long have you and your wife have you had this discussion before you're going to allow iPad or the phone in in your baby's hands?
We've discussed it, but we have not figured it out yet. I still feel so kind of wrapped up in the early stages of the
Mm,
process that,
yeah.
I'm listening to friends and colleagues with different policies, but we haven't quite come up with a good plan yet. It's, I think, different. We have maybe the wisdom 3 years ago about when did you get tablets and phones, and we're getting the phone bans, and now we're getting, is AI gonna totally disrupt K through 12 education? What does that look like? So
Oh,
it
yeah.
feels even kind of harder to answer than it did a few years ago.
I think I'm more afraid of the people. It's not necessarily the technology. I'm afraid of the people and the power and what they want from it. I stressed out the other day. I think I heard they now want to. I don't know how much money they put into having the AI system in the military. It was something like that, and I was thinking, where are we going? And it's the people behind it I'm more worried about. Maybe not the technique. Because as I said earlier, the biggest wars in human history is about religion. I mean, it's always it's the human. We are not the best people. So the creature. I want us to be like dogs because they are great.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But I would say that it's kind of funny to use an NRA quote in this, which is, guns don't kill people, people kill people. And there's some truth to that in this space. But again, I think part of the problem, I do agree that a lot of wonderful stuff is going to come out of this, but the problem is it takes only 1 out of 8 billion people when you're talking about a fission bomb, it only takes 1, you know? And that's what partially is frightening to me, that it's you could have 99.9999 wondrous creations, and it's that 0.0001 that would spoil it for everybody, and that's partially why I'm scared.
I
Mm.
think you can take this into a kind of a corporate setting. So, worked in the private sector a little bit. They might have half of the company or 80% of the company who they wanna they wanna be ethical, they like AI ethics, they care about this stuff. But, someone comes in and says, "Oh, no, we don't wanna waste money on that." And those people are all overruled. So yeah, so even if we can be good and bad people, and collectively we can want to do a lot of good things, a few sort of bad decisions get made, or a few governance structures are not in place, and we get some serious collective problems. So I take that point, Seth.
And also, who wants to be a billionaire? I think some of the profiling of the people who become billionaires um, negates humanity. You can't have true humanity and become a billionaire. And so the people developing this stuff, I inherently have some distrust for, I have to say, you know.
You want to see the people with this much power to be the most circumspect and wise and
Yes.
pro-social and thoughtful.
Yeah.
And there was a model of corporate leader where at least some of that ethos was important, even if shareholder value was also important. But yeah, I mean, we're seeing big tech and corporate leaders, not everyone, but also too many from my perspective, that are not embodying the virtues that we would want. Even if you have these virtues and you're the most educated and thoughtful and connected person, this stuff is still really hard to do well and to figure out in the right way. So yeah, it would be great if either our power was distributed more evenly, or our leaders could think a little bit more about
Well, and also the unintended consequences. How many times have I mean, I hate text. I text Caroline constantly, and I'm sure there are unintended consequences. You can have the best meaning. I can send Caroline a text from the bottom of my heart, and maybe she misreads it somehow, or I didn't say it
Oh, yeah.
quite, you know what I mean? And so it's with something of stuff that has this power to it, even the best intentions can lead to danger, in my opinion.
We get an anecdote for you. So I'll take us back to the education space again, but I think it applies across the private sector.
Sure.
Anecdote from a colleague, maybe 2 years ago. We're getting sort of early days of large language models and work in the classroom. Of corporate representative says to a seminar room, they're selling a product. Hey, these tools are so cool. Uh, Once you use this, you're never going to have to face a blank page again. It's so stressful. Everybody hates that. You never have to face the blank page. And we were all just not really happy with that sentiment. When I heard this story and was reflecting with this group, and it took me a few months, and I sort of have now assimilated this into my thinking. I say, no, wait a second, students, you need to face the blank page. The blank page
Mm.
is generative. It's how you build resourcefulness and creativity and come up with your own ideas and your own thoughts. So this person, came in, they thought they're providing a helpful tool. Nobody has to face a blank page. Um, Despite their intentions to make someone's work better or easier, it's complicated. And that's why we do need to have all these actors and voices and careful, collective, deliberate social thinking to roll these things out thoughtfully, or to govern them thoughtfully.
Yeah. Yeah. That gave me chill what you said. No, we want the blank page. That's um Kristen, what do you fear for the future? What's like if it's AI continues and the same small group, the powerful actors, the ones who are doing it. I mean, what what uh, what do you fear for the future, or do you?
I'll give you three, Caroline. In kind of my community, the discourse has often been split between the quote sort of short-term ethics people who worry about bias and discrimination and privacy, and then the long-term people who think about sort of catastrophic risks and AI takeover. So this is this background debate.
Mhm.
I've often been, and for a long time, I started. I think I'm the first person or second person to graduate with a PhD in AI policy, very early in the field. I think my concerns have been middle range social collective impacts. So three of them. So we've discussed a lot misinformation.
Yeah.
Back when we had GPT-2, some of us were already saying, "Ooh, this could be problematic for propaganda and misinformation in authoritarian governments."
Mm.
And this is part of why OpenAI didn't release it at the time. They were OpenAI, and people call them hypocritical because they weren't releasing this tool because it was too dangerous. So a lot of ironies there. But yeah, misinformation, deepfakes. I've been very concerned about deepfakes. Had done some research about these sort of second order harms and trust and accountability. Second would be labor, and we can have a whole podcast on who gains jobs and loses jobs and predictions, and we have
Yeah.
a team and a project that's doing that. But even in the best case scenario where we sort of maybe have job gains or we work fewer hours, there's disruption. There are people who lose their jobs, right? Winners, losers. You keep your job, but your job is worse because you're doing all cognitive work or you're doing all manual work or you lose your agency or there's surveillance. So that, again, a bunch of ways that work can be less meaningful and produce less satisfaction. The third one is something we've also touched on, which is kind of power and inequality. And we think about, there's big companies that have a lot of power compared to small companies and citizens. There's countries that have a lot of power compared to other countries.
Yes.
And I worry about this, most not just, is the US beating the European Union or, are they going to get enough, tech unicorn companies in Europe? But I worry about the low income countries that have historically, they've developed from agricultural economies to manufacturing economies to service economies. And I'm wondering, do they still have that pathway? Or do the wealthy countries sort of re-insource the labor and they automate the labor? Or they keep the labor locally, but they take all the profits and use local machines and whatever it may be. Are there trajectories towards closing inequality or to developing in those countries? So global inequality would be kind of the third one I think I'd most worry about.
If all AI users understood one thing, what should it be?
So I'm gonna deliberate out loud a little bit just so I can go for some bad
Yes.
answers, and possible answers. So I was tinkering with this idea of agency. Hey, you have agency. You can use some tools or not. You can preserve things. I was tinkering with advocacy. You can get involved. You can participate. You can shape things. There's a lot of discourse on AI literacy and participation. I think I want to go back to instead. I want to say if there's one thing, it's our point about art and music, and this is to say efficiency is just one value, even when you're doing your job or you're in school. Doing something faster, even doing something more accurately and quote unquote better is not the only value, is not the only goal. Feel free to do art slowly, do music slowly, get it wrong, read slowly, write poorly, learn how to write, stare at a blank page for 10 hours. These are things that constitute what it means to be human. So just so remember, in terms of the values that we care about, efficiency is a cool one. It makes a lot of other things faster. It is not the only value that you have to hold to, and it may not be the most important value.
I love that. Now you make me
Wow.
teary.
Boom.
I start getting
Boom. My heart
tears.
is warm. I
Me
don't know if I feel
too.
still
Glad I'm
Really.
reaching your
warm.
artistic spirit, Caroline.
Yeah.
Yes. That was, thank you. Thank you for saying that, because as I said, now I'm sitting here and tearing up because I thought that was so powerful and it's so important. And let's us just be humans and don't forget what really matters in life. You know?
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that. And it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Yeah.
And yes, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Nice speaking with both of you.
Yeah.
right.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for watching or listening to The Internet is Crack. Tune in next week when we have another great conversation about robotics, AI, and the internet. You can watch us or listen to us on YouTube or Spotify or many other outlets. And don't forget to follow us on social media. See you next Monday.